In this video, I'm going to be giving you some of the top solutions that some dog trainers might tell you work when it comes to stopping your dog's barking, but that actually don't. I'm going to be explaining why those methods don't work, and I'm also going to be telling you what you should be doing instead. Coming up. What's up guys, it's Jenna with Dog Liaison, where I coach you on how to enhance your dog's mental health needs. If you're interested in a nerdier approach to canine cognition, do me a favor, consider subscribing. Now, I have been training dogs for over a decade, and in that time I have used many a solution to try to get a dog to stop barking. Many of them that we're going to be reviewing today. Most of them did not succeed for me, and I'm going to be explaining why they don't work. So if you're interested, let's get into it.
Inertia has recently discovered all of the pedestrian traffic and the busy road in front of our house, and her barking is beginning to get a little out of control. So I really need to get her in shape here. Stay, come on, over here, lie down. And so I'm really encouraged by the fact that she recovers relatively quickly after an outburst, but really I want to minimize or eventually eliminate those kinds of outbursts.
The one thing I will say about this is that this particular bark is not just any old type of bark. This type of bark is a border collie. So what she's doing is she is responding to her DNA, which tells her she's supposed to go towards the people running. She's supposed to herd them. She's supposed to get them back in line. She's doing her job. And then she was recovering out of that genetic hardwired behavior and deciding to do her learned skill, which would be that down stay. So what we've actually seen is her do two types of skills at once. The problem is that primary skill is really, really hard to undo. This is one thing that I encourage my folks to think about when they're asking themselves, I want my dog not to bark, you know, is your dog barking because that is a DNA hardwired behavior? If you are combating genetics, like we talked about in that video, then the odds are not in your favor, my friend. You must work extra hard to combat that DNA'd behavior. So what we saw here was that she responded in a more genetic, instinctual response, and then she immediately jumped right back into her learned skill. That's very difficult to do, and it's very promising that she's able to do it. However, I wouldn't necessarily say that responding after the fact is the right idea. You know, he sort of lets her do it and then tells her down and come back in. In these moments where she's calm and not chasing after, those are actually the moments that you want to be feeding. Those are the moments that you want to be addressing. And instead of letting her have the opportunity to display the undesired behavior and then correct it and then treat her for doing the desired behavior, just treat her when she's not doing the undesired behavior at all. This is optimal learning right here, when she's seeing her triggers walk by but not choosing to chase and bark. That's when you really want to be feed, reward, and instilling those habitual behaviors like a relaxation protocol, for example.
Before we have the fence installed, just because of the danger factor out here. So we got a jogger across the street there. Good.
So right here, we would want to be yes and feed. We would want to be right there rewarding this desired behavior. The more we can make this desired behavior more rewarded, reinforced, more habitual, the more likely it is that you're actually able to combat her DNA or her genetic behavior.
Good girl. She's discovered her mystery machine as well.
And that's another opportunity that we want to be giving a little bit more reinforcement than just a good girl. Good girl, she didn't even look like she responded to that verbal praise. You know, there absolutely are some dogs that are going to respond positively to verbal praise, and I'm not going to discount that as a possible reinforcement, but in the grand scheme of things, it's really just not that valuable. And so when we're talking about how valuable those cars are, how valuable the runners are, how valuable the everything else is, you know, good girl pales in comparison.
Stay. Got a jogger coming up as well on this side, so double distractions.
So this is the moment that you would want to be yes feeding. When she's offering that desired behavior, when she's giving you the response that she wants, you must be telling her to. Otherwise, you're just waiting for her to implode. Otherwise, you're just waiting for her to bark just so that you can correct her, just so that you can put her right back in a spot. This is your optimal learning opportunity, and you want to be reinforcing her throughout that process.
good girl.
With more than just a good girl.
It's a pretty dog. Stay. She's about to be surprised. Yes, good. Lie down. You almost saw her think about barking there. I was able to intervene there and get the attention on me before the outburst occurred. That really is your best time. Dogs will give you a little bit of foreshadowing just about all of the time. For example, you'll see their eyes light.
Yeah, so this would be a really good solution if your dog is not afraid, if your dog is not concerned about his safety, then this could be a reasonable solution.
Cesar's work with Bo is just getting started. Now he turns his attention to one of the biggest problems Miss G and the Freedom Riders have been having.
Oh, no.
Bo disrupting the office.
This is where we have our meetings, this is where we have lunch. But the problem is then he wants to be in here because this is everyone he wants to hang out with. So he starts barking and he'll start trying to break down the door.
Wow. So the key is to snap Bo from that excited state and change his conditioning so he associates meeting with the calm state. So that way he does not behave excited. Say squirrel.
Squirrel.
Hey.
To recondition Bo, Cesar has Miss G call out the word squirrel, a word that's always triggered his excitement in the past.
Say squirrel.
Squirrel.
Then he gives an immediate correction.
This is the sound that I use when I want to stop the brain. So squirrel.
Squirrel. Squirrel.
It takes the mind to a different state. Do it again, squirrel.
Squirrel.
Oh, no, I'm gonna overrule your conditioning. Say squirrel.
Squirrel. Squirrel.
Now you're adding.
Where's the squirrel? Oh my gosh.
Okay, so a couple of things on that. For starters, I do think that what we could see here was that there was a little bit of fear of missing out. He really did want to be part of the community. And that makes perfect sense if you're dealing with, especially with like a lab, because they are very sociable. They are especially, they want to be part of the community. They want to be part of the event. And that's not just like their personality, but that's actually how they are designed to be. They're meant to be especially sociable. So of course you have a dog who wants to be part of the group. So what you really want to be doing is recreate a different alternative behavior. I do think that it's okay to instill in a dog the ability to be in another room and doing an activity away from the so-called event. But getting him in a stay where he's just sitting in the other room, staring into the abyss, longingly wanting to be a part of that community, that is not a very sustainable option. I'm just gonna be honest. It might work one time, it might work 5 times, but likely it's not going to happen for a long-term solution where a dog is just willing to just stay on the other side of the door and just stay at the door and do nothing all by himself for 15 minutes or longer while the whole event is happening on the other side of the door. That's just not a long-term solution. What is a long-term solution is teaching him a relaxation protocol to do alone, is teaching him to do a food puzzle alone. Instilling these more self-sufficient behaviors acts as a way to prevent the bark from happening in the first place, and that is the #1 goal. Once the dog barks, our solution, our next line of thinking is, what is my dog communicating with the bark? And if you're interested in learning what different barks mean, I did a whole science explained on dog barking, and I really recommend you go check it out. But your next line of defense needs to be, what is causing the bark? It's not a matter of, oh, my dog is barking, I need to make it stop. We need to address what is causing the bark. And this doesn't really address the cause. The cause is that he's upset because he can't be part of the community. Okay, how can we give him more actions to feel comfortable and to feel happy by himself when he's not able to be with the group, when he's not able to be with the community?
Today, we're going to learn how to teach your dog to stop barking. It may sound nonsensical, but to stop your dog from barking, first, teach him to bark on command. Give your dog the command to speak. Have someone immediately make a noise, such as knocking on the door, that is sure to make your dog bark. Let him bark 2 or 3 times, then stick a tasty treat in front of his nose.
Okay, so here's the thing. I once taught this as well. I once taught that if you teach a dog to bark, then you can then turn around and teach the dog not to bark. And I did teach this for a little while, but here's what I found. When you're teaching a dog to bark and then to alternatively next not bark, there requires a certain degree of stimulus control. Stimulus control is the big fancy phrase which basically says it's like an on-off switch. You can turn on the barking and you can turn off the barking. And that requires a lot of training to get that level of stimulus control. It's not that it's impossible. It's not that it's, you know, nobody can do it. It absolutely is possible. But it requires a pretty significant amount of training, and that is especially true when you have a dog like a lab that is inclined towards barking anyway. When you have a dog that is going to be self-reinforced by barking because it's just a natural dopamine kick, that is just making it 10 times harder on you in the long run. So again, it's not that this method isn't viable or possible, it's just that it's an added step that I haven't found is worth the work. And the reality is that many of my clients, most of the common dog owners, are not really going to see the amount of work through, or not actually going to put the amount of stimulus control on those behaviors to actually make it possible. What I have found is a more viable or user-friendly option is actually just to prevent the bark in the first place. As I keep saying, we want to make sure that the bark isn't occurring in the first place. If you're working with the doorbell, so she had said, okay, well, I'm just gonna do the little knock, cause the dog to bark, and then reward it. Again, this requires the dog to do an added step. If you start off with a quieter knock, to the point where the dog isn't barking at all, then you just reward the silence, reward the lack of a behavior. That is the action. The action is silence. So we're focusing what we want our dog to do and reinforcing that behavior. Again, this really comes down to, especially if your dog is not fearful. If the bark is happening as a result of some sort of fear or concern or alarm, or anything in that emotional vein, then you need to address the emotion. The emotion causing the bark is what you want to address, not the bark. If what is causing the bark is excitement, is that arousal, then we need to desensitize that moment. How can we take that exciting moment and desensitize it? That is what you want to focus on, not, okay, let me get my dog to do a quiet behavior and teach that on cue. That's just an added step that most people just don't want to do.
Teaching your dog to come when called. So let's try it on our dogs. Lewis! Lewis, come! Good boy. So when your dog comes, give him praise as in a positive reward. Good boy, Lewis. And then follow that up with a treat. Good boy. Jesse. Jesse, come. Oh, good boy, Jesse. Good boy.
So the idea is that when your dog is mid-bark, so for example, if you have a dog that barks at the door, you could be able to call, come, and then they come to you and get their treat. So this is a really solid interruption. I do think it's good to have a recall cue or a come cue that will interrupt something. I think that that's fine. But this kind of goes back to the same thing as I'm saying before, where the dog is still rehearsing the bark. And if you do this for too long, you end up in this other cycle where, okay, I'm going to bark at the door. My person will call me come. I'll come to them. I'll get a treat. I'll bark at the door. The person will call me come. I'll get the treat. I'll bark at the door. I'll come. I'll get a treat. And so you still end up getting the bark. Remember, dogs are routine oriented. They're pattern oriented. So if you're not setting up the pattern that you want to do for life, then you probably need to reorient the pattern and get the one you want. I don't think there's anything wrong with teaching a recall out of a high arousing situation. I think it's actually very impressive when I see a dog that is highly stimulated, highly aroused, and will still pause in that middle and do the recall. That is important. That's impressive. But for preventing barking, it's not very conducive. It's not necessarily a long-term solution for this problem. A more long-term solution is if your dog is concerned about the knocking, desensitize knocking. Specifically, and don't let your dog bark in the process of doing that. If your dog is concerned about the people walking by, address the issue of the people walking by. Don't just yell at the bark and then ask them to come in. So overall, we need to be looking at what routines we're instilling in the dogs. Is the routine that we're instilling starting with barking? If the routine starts with barking, and then the solution is to correct the bark and then do some sort of reinforcement, positive or otherwise, well, that's probably not a very long-term solution. It might be a short-term solution depending on how you're doing it, in the case of like the recall one we just saw. But overall, that's not a long-term solution because it still started with the bark. If we're talking about your dog is triggered or alarmed or concerned or fearful of another dog, another person, another sound, then you need to be doing a process called desensitization or a process called counter conditioning. And these are two methods that I'm going to be teaching in detail in a free online masterclass that you are invited to. So if your dog is concerned about another trigger, a sound, person, or dog, then you probably are the right candidate for this free online masterclass, which is happening on November 19th, 2020 at 4:30 p.m. Pacific. And if you're not available to attend live, there will be a recording. So make sure you sign up using the link in the description box below. There are also more details in the description box, so make sure to check all that out, and I hope to see you on November 19th. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor, hit that like button, consider subscribing for more nerdy content on dog training and dog behavior, and if you are already subscribed, make sure to hit that notification bell so you get notified when I drop a new video. I hope to see you on November 19th. I'll see you soon.